Welcome. This is the Your Brand interview. This is our launch episode. And before we get into our who we are, who Matt and Debo are, a little bit about the purpose, the vision, the reason for this podcast, I guess. Um, I don't know where a lot of people are at today when it comes to looking for jobs. For myself, been looking for a little bit, and I find that I am struggling with getting into the interview itself. Okay. But a fear that I think a lot of people can carry on to is like, cool, I got in the interview. This is great. Now what do I do? My experience of being interviewed and the interviewer is that there should be more weight laid into the who are you? Who am I type of the interview. Because once you get into the interview, your resume is spoken for you, your experience has gotten you into the room. Now the question is are you a good fit with our team? So this medium is to lean into the question, which most interviews will ask you, tell me a little bit about yourself. Now, my struggle with that, being on both sides of the table, is that most interviews are about an hour long. Hiring manager might have come out of another interview or another meeting, and then right after this interview, they've got another meeting. So you've got an hour to win them over, and they ask the question, "Tell me a little bit about yourself." If you take a half an hour to describe that, you've now cut into this time of them asking their bank of 12 questions that they ask all their interview candidates. Okay. I personally struggle with, okay, well, now I took too much time. They're going to shotgun these questions. Do I, now at the end, do I have enough time to ask the questions that I have for the company to make sure that it's a good fit? So having those thoughts kind of roll around in my mind, I was just like, I wonder if we had a place where we could kind of like lean into like, who are you? Who am I? And that's where this idea for the Your Brand interview presented itself. So what this is going to look like is Debo, who's co-host with me. We are going to have guests on this platform, kind of like lean into that question. Tell me a little bit about yourself, or what is your brand? Now we could list off a whole bunch of questions that we're going to send to every guest, but I don't want this to feel like an interview. I want to know who you are. We might have some guests that have the exact same strengths and weaknesses, but they're two different people. So, what makes you unique? So, a little bit behind the curtain for our guests, there are three questions slash statements that we will send them beforehand. And those questions include tell me a few words that describe you. Okay. The guests can kind of take that however they want, however many words. They can be simple words, complex words, but we just want to know what kind of words you would use to describe yourself. Another question is, what are your hobbies? Okay. And then another thing that Debo and I will lean into with Debo's expertise is Clifton Strengths. If you have not heard of Clifton Strengths, maybe you've heard of Strengths Finder or Strengths Quests. There's a whole bunch of books by Roth. Tom Rath. Um, I would encourage you to lean into those because we're going to have questions kind of like pulling out what are strengths associated with that. Uh, Debo, having a lot of experience with Clifton strengths, will probably um, bring ideas or thoughts that you may not have been aware of with those strengths. Um, so those are like the three kind of questions that we're going to have on a consistent basis. Whether we get to them in the interview or not, that's kind of what we're going to focus on. The other archway to kind of like lean into the vision of this is I struggle with, and I don't think I'm alone, that people want to say that they're a jack of all trades, that they want to be able to say, I have 1,000 strengths and no weaknesses. And as great as that is, I don't know anybody where that's a true statement. And so I want to lean into, and I don't know if anybody's read the book by Jim Collins, Good to Great, where I kind of like want to lean into what are you the expert in? What are you great in? You can be good at thousands of things, but what are you great in? And there's no wrong answers to these things. Like you're going to be great at certain things, and I kind of like want to find out what those are. So those are kind of like the talking points for this medium. Um, with that said, my hope, my dreams, my wishes for this is that if you are struggling to get into that interview, if you uh, want an organization or a hiring manager to know a little bit about you, that hopefully this, once posted, you can then send with your resume to organizations and they can get to know you a little bit better than the time allotted in a traditional interview. Also, with this venue, we can ask questions that most organizations can't per HR regulations. I want to know about you and your family. Like, what makes you tick? Like, what do you enjoy? And I feel like the corporate world or the interview world, there's just so many limitations where, well, I can't ask Debo what his favorite sports team is because if he says the team that we all dislike and we don't hire him, then there's a lawsuit waiting to happen. And so I want this to kind of be like a place where, yeah, we can kind of like let our guard down, be relaxed, know who we are. So Debo's going to be our first, we'll say guinea pig. He's our first, we'll say guest for this. And there'll be a future episode where our roles will be flipped and kind of go down that road. So, um, so I'm Matt. This is Debo, and this is Your Brand Interview. And we're going to kick it off to Debo. Hi, Debo. How's it going?
Good. How are you, Matt?
Not too bad. It's snowing currently in Colorado,
Is it
which is
really?
crazy. Yeah.
Wow. It's 70 in Grove City. The AC is broke in my office, so it's 77.4 degrees in my office right now.
Uh,
So we are at very opposite ends of the spectrum right now.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I've got my snowshoes on and ready to tackle the day, I guess. So
And I'll get my shorts and sandals.
that's my preferred outfit, by the way. So Debo, we'll just kick things off, have our conversation flow. What are a few words that you would use to describe yourself?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and maybe I'm at a point in my career where I'm trying to streamline like what direction am I going, where have I been, and what am I best at. So somebody just asked me like, what kind of brings you the most joy at work? Which I thought was an
Mm,
interesting question. And my response, the more I thought, was like, I think I like to live at the intersection of people and technology.
mm,
So I can be on both of those avenues, but where they intersect is where I thrive. So when I often try and describe myself, I realize sometimes I feel like those are competing things. Like you're either good with people or you're good with technology or you're good with academics or you're good. There are things you're good at. But my idea is like, well, maybe I think I'm good socially and talking to people, and I really enjoy getting to know people, finding out what makes them tick. I also really enjoy problem solving and using technology to create efficiencies and finding new ways to do things that's less stressful. So, where I think I love to exist is a place where I'm plugged in socially and using technologies to achieve and problem solve. So, that's maybe some words I would use to kind of describe where I'm at and how I like to
mm.
to function.
So with technology, like I feel like that's I want to say a big word or more of like today a general word. So is there like specific technology that you like to lean into? I feel like recently AI, machine learning is like the buzzword now for technology, or do you see yourself with technology like hardware and kind of going down that way?
Yeah, I kind of probably use the word technology vaguely because it's intentional. So I've got a drone on the shelf there that I got to fly. Got my drone license a couple years ago. Didn't that was an initiative from the boss. She came in and said, "Hey, get your drone license, and we're going to fly the drone, and we're going to use that instead of a ladder to check the rooftops of the buildings. Way more efficient, way quicker." Okay. Last year, I was told, "Hey, we're buying a 3D printer." I know nothing about 3D printers. Okay, I'm going to learn and figure out how that works. And we've printed a ton of stuff and saved a ton of money. So drones, 3D printers. The one thing technology wise I am limited at is coding because I've never like I can do a lot of coding when I see it, I can manipulate it and change it, but I'm not good at writing code from scratch. And so people are like, "Oh, Debo's good at technology. Here, write this HTML. Here, write this CSS, write Python." And I'm like, "Ugh." Like I do a bit of SQL and that's it. But the funny thing is with AI, gosh, I've been using a lot of AI lately just to write code and say, "Hey, AI, this is what I need. Write it for me." And so
Mm,
technology is on this weird change right now where like what we've known to be stable for years, I'm good at coding, thus I will always be important to the tech
mm,
industry is like, oh, will I though? Because like if AI can do my job for me, yeah. So I think I like to be on the more cutting edge of technology. I like to try stuff out. I like
mm,
to mess around with smart home. Like somebody just asked me how many smart home devices I have, and I wasn't sure. And I checked my network, and it's like 72. And they were like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, what?" I'm actually surprised by that. So over the years, I just added a smart light here and there, or a switch here and there, or an
mm,
outlet, and now suddenly they're all over my house. So I like to learn and apply various kinds of technology, whether that's software or hardware. And learning the new technology is part of the thrill. Like that's the hunt for
mm.
me is like, let's what is this? What is this? How does this work? What technology is this and how can I see this changing our future? That's where I get giddy and
Yeah.
nerdy.
Yeah, so with the technology, and we'll go to the relational side of things in a second, but technology because it's one of my passions as well. Um, you feel that technology, and maybe I don't get this from the way you speak about it, but do you feel like the technology that's coming out with AI and smart homes is now causing a mountaintop or a peak in our evolution in the sense of like now that I've got I don't need to learn coding. I can just throw that into the machine. It will produce what I need to produce. So then now I have no higher level of thinking um, to kind of go down that road.
You know, okay. So I look at AI as a continuation of the digital revolution. So if you
Mm,
look at there's four main revolutions in communication. Number one, speech, the ability to communicate was like revolution number one. Number two, writing, the ability to write and have language and
mhm,
write things down and pass messages. Number three was the printing press, the ability to mass communicate. And so when you look at each of these, and particularly like it's really interesting to see the effect of the printing press on, say, like the Protestant Reformation, like the ability to spread messages
mm,
out really quickly. That was a huge thing. So when you look at those three, the ability to digitally transcribe messages and pass them, that's the fourth revolution. So when you look at the impact of the printing press and the ability to change the world with written books very quickly, the impact of even the Bible being written and spread so easily once the printing press versus handwriting, it changes how the world changes because of Christianity. It changes like I said, the
Mm,
Protestant Reformation. It's really interesting to see. So I look at the digital Reformation and say, okay, AI, although it's a distinct chapter, it's still part of the same book. And it's like, hey, a this is a change that's we're still figuring out what this looks like. So just like, the printing press helped books come into being, but we didn't have graphic novels at that time, or we didn't have things. There's still levels to that, to the printing press. And so AI, I think, is just a natural next step. Social media, another part of that. I think that there is a peak and a valley associated with each of these things. It's a little extreme to say it's going to be the end of all society at this point, but I do think that there are ethics and rules that we have to question with AI, but I don't think they're going to be solved overnight. I think we'll be debating them for the rest of our existence, just like we are when it comes to theology and other topics where we've never still settled on it. We've thought about things differently, but we've never settled on what exactly is the best way forward. And so, yeah, I mean,
mm,
AI is going to be a major market disruptor as far as economics go, but I'm more intrigued by the moral code that goes along with AI.
mm.
Where do we apply morals to AI and what direction does that take? Which I do think in
Yeah,
our lifetime has to be somewhat decided on what we decide is acceptable behavior for AI. So yeah, it's a
yeah,
really interesting thing to talk about.
yeah. And the last comment that I'll put with it is I know that there's multiple different AI uh, sources out there, or services out there. And I have heard that there are some with like a Christian bent on the machine learning side of it. So it's going to produce results from your prompt that are more Christian focused. And again, AI doesn't have faith, but it's what information you're putting into the system on to help what it's going to produce from the prompts that it produces. So I know that there is some sources that will kind of like have that bent, but it just
Hmm.
depends on what AI um, source you're going to use. But I'm with you. Like I think it's just it's new. People are still figuring out how to regulate it. Um, the thing that I kind of came across recently was like, who gets credit when AI produces something? Who gets credit? Do you, the one that
Hmm.
put the prompt? Does the company that produced the AI get the credit for it? Does the um, references used by AI to produce the results to your prompt get the credit for it? It's real kind of gray-ish. So,
Yeah.
and my last thought is like, if I go, hey, write song lyrics to a new song that has a Taylor Swift bent. AI can produce something. Well, does Taylor Swift get it because we're using her theme? Does AI get it, or do I get it because it's a new concept? So some crazy stuff. And
Yeah.
maybe like right before we got on, you talked about part twos and part threes. We could probably go on to a part 17 on talking about this stuff.
Oh yeah.
But I want to,
Fascinating. Yeah.
yeah, I want to lean into kind of going down to your next question. Um, what are some hobbies? What are things that Debo likes to do?
Yeah, so hockey's a big one for me. So whether that's playing, watching, coaching in all the various forms, I've really enjoyed it. Since I was a kid, I was always
Mm,
a funny fact about me, I guess people don't know. I didn't actually play ice. I never skated like on ice. I skated once in high school at like a youth group event. Other than that, I didn't start playing ice hockey until I graduated college and got a real job and decided I'm going to try this. But
yeah.
I played on the street growing up with my friends. And in high school is when I started playing roller hockey. And in college, I played roller. So I
Mm,
never actually played ice until, yeah. But yeah, so that's a big hobby of mine.
yeah.
Recently went to an Erie Otters game, and that's an OHL. It's like the kids who are trying to get drafted in the NHL. That was really cool. So
Mm,
I love learning and seeing various forms of hockey and levels. That's a hobby. Um, I love a good story. I'm all about narrative. And so whether that's in the form of movies, in the form of books, or even
mm,
in the form of video games, like I like a good video game that is like story driven, character development, surprising twists and turns, that's a go-to for me. So yeah,
Mm,
a lot of that narrative will come out in the way I speak and the way I tell metaphors and things, but it also comes out a lot in my hobbies. So
mm,
yeah, and maybe even just like leadership in general. I love
mm.
studying like organizational leadership and how places function. I love context of history and knowing where we've been and where we're going to go. So those are probably some of my main hobbies.
Yeah. So with hockey, do you have a favorite team that you're following or yeah.
Philadelphia Flyers for life. Growing up, Eric Lindros was the prodigal son that was going to bring us a cup and never did, but I still wear number 88 because of him. So, I
Yeah.
mean, Flyers forever. And I live in Pittsburgh, which is, well, Pittsburgh, Western Pennsylvania. I'm like an hour north of Pittsburgh, but that
Mm.
is dangerous territory to be in as a Flyers fan. So I have to watch myself sometimes by not getting too animated when I hear about
Yeah.
the Penguins. And listen, the sun is just above the horizon in both our cities right now, but in Pittsburgh it's setting and in Philly it's rising. So we've got a great promising outlook for a team. And Pittsburgh's got a bunch of old guys who are going to be great Hall of Famers, but they ain't going to get a
Yeah.
cup. So yeah,
Cool.
those are my feelings on that topic.
That's great. Hopefully, people in Pittsburgh aren't too worked up over that. So,
That's fine. Leave a
um,
comment. Let us hear your voice.
yeah, exactly. Um, I liked how you said one of your hobbies is just like story focused, like whether that be movies or video games or books. Um, what's a recent movie that you've seen that like impacted you, or even TV show? I might throw a TV show in the mix on that.
I'm not gonna lie. I recently haven't had anything great. There's nothing that I've
Mm,
watched
okay.
recently. Uh, okay, let's define recently. I'm thinking recently in like the last 6 months, but like the most recent to be super impactful and be really impressed with Ted Lasso. I mean, that show is phenomenal. It's the best
Mm,
I've like ever seen since like Band of Brothers when it comes to leadership and just storytelling and building a team and coaching. I mean, that Ted Lasso, like I was just talking to somebody who teaches a leadership class and I was like, "Bro, just play this show." Minus the vulgarities, there are plenty of curse words in that show. Minus the
mm,
cursing, that show will teach so many people how to like you watch that show and you just want to be a better person. Like I want
mm,
to impact the world for good and that is really cool. So
yeah,
crazy how that show also came out of the fact that it was supposed to just be a commercial.
uh,
And like somebody said, this could be a TV show. And not only did they make it a TV show, they've made plenty of things TV shows that were terrible. They somehow took this funny idea about how Americans don't understand soccer and turned it into an amazing show that's about like mental health and that's about leadership and that's about like caring for your neighbor well. I mean, it's just phenomenal. So, yes, I would highly
yeah,
recommend if you have not seen it, please watch it.
yeah,
It is well worth it.
yeah. No, that's like it almost comes down to the thought on just like telling the story. Like you can have a great experience, but can you say it in a way that's captivating or moving of the audience? You know, and
Yes.
I find you, Debo, as a person that's like very specific in your language choice, that you're when you try to present something, you're trying to present it as a story to captivate us. You know, like I think we've all sat in a class, whether K through 12 or in college, where you're just like, oh my gosh, this professor is smart. I get you're very intelligent, but I'm going to fall asleep in this class because you have not captivated me. And then I'm going to stress out on an exam because I don't even know what we covered. So
Yeah.
I feel like one of like your strengths, which we'll get into in a moment, like like telling the story, telling your perspective, getting that hook, captivating me, whether that be in telling us about a show or your flyers or something like that. Like you captivate us, which is really intriguing, which is really cool because I think a lot of people and I probably throw myself in this boat where I talk and I ramble, and too many people are too polite and they just let that happen. Where it's just like, I feel like Debo's going to say something. We need to wait because this is going to be gold that comes out of him because I want to hear this. Whether there's going to be a punchline or not, I feel like it's worth listening to.
You know, it's funny you say that because everybody in our office, we've associated everyone in our office with a character from Ted Lasso. And somebody was like, "Oh, you're Ted Lasso." And I was like, "No, no. Ted Lasso's like Jesus. Nobody's Ted Lasso. Like you can't do that." And they were like, "Who are you?" And I was like, "I'm Trent Krim from The Independent," which literally somebody just gave me a sticker today as a birthday gift. So literally, she got me this sticker on Etsy, and I thought that this is so cool. She's like, I thought about that. I saw this on Etsy and I thought that's Debo. And I was like, oh, I appreciate that. So yeah, and it just happened in the hockey room, hockey locker room last week at a game. I said some story and I realized I looked around and the whole room was listening to me. And they were like, oh, Debo, we're so entranced by what you're saying. I was like, it wasn't that interesting. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
For better or worse, my daughter's like this too. You can
Mm,
command a room. You got to be careful though, because you can also translate negative energy just like you can positive, where you end up
yeah.
like getting everyone in a mood as
Yeah.
in opposed to so like controlling the attitude is probably the difficulty I struggle with more than anything. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. As Uncle Ben would say, with great power comes great responsibility, you know?
yes. Yeah,
So,
I
yeah.
also recently there's another show on Amazon I saw, Invincible, which is kind of like an alternate superhero world, and they
Yeah.
cover maybe some of the same tropes as other superhero shows or like
Mm,
universes like Marvel or DC, but they say things different ways. So one of the things they said there was, you can be one of the interesting phrases that caught my attention was you can be the hero or you can save the day, but you can't do both, which was an interesting
mm,
one that I've been unpacking and thinking through. So
mm,
that's what I love to tell a story or a punchline or like a concept and unpack that with people. Yeah, love
yeah.
doing that.
Cool. So, last thing, and we've heard a lot about you, which has been great. Um, do you happen to have your recent five Clifton Strength Finder results? And I say recent. If anybody's gone down the rabbit hole of Clifton Strengths, I feel like I think personally I've taken it three times and my five have kind of changed and been kind of fluid. Um, I think I heard a while ago that you should have two or three that are pretty consistent in your top five. They might move from like one to five and whatnot.
Hmm.
But so recently, and maybe even say like when the last time you took the test for these results. But yeah, kind of go off that.
Yeah, this looks like a cool graphic, right? I just have this on my door, so I pulled it up. But yeah, these are my five strengths. I gotta think. The time I took this most recently would have been 2022. So I will say though, like the consistency for me has been pretty fluid. Studying Strengths Quest a little more, they basically say your top eight don't change per se. So they may bump around. And so, yeah, the ones that I've lost, I used to have connectedness and positivity. And I joke that Western Pennsylvania has beaten the positivity out of me, so it doesn't show up anymore. But yeah, I definitely had positivity when I was in Colorado, and that
Yeah.
was a pretty high one. But yeah, so yeah, these five strengths. I would teach an introductory class in Colorado Christian University for incoming freshmen, and we would always cover this, and it was always fascinating because I think that when you're in college, it's a pretty pivotal age where you're, especially if you're farther away from home, you're learning who you are and figuring that out. And some of that you just didn't realize because it's always been you, or you've been around your family where those things were pretty normal. Now you're in a college setting mixed up with a ton of other people, and you're like, oh, I think differently than they do, but I'm not sure how or why. And so I think strengths has been really helpful for me in college, helping instruct college age students to kind of figure out who am I, how was I created, how do I live out these, like how do I identify where I fit into this world? And that's kind of what I looked at, in professionally more so with these five. So yeah, woo, communication, includer, strategic, and context are my five. Woo stands for winning others over. And it's kind of like we get energy, woo people, we get energy from meeting new people. So I can spend a ton of time meeting new people and it not be nearly as fatigued as other people would. That fills me up. I get excited. I spent a
Mm,
summer in Jamaica meeting, working with Jamaicans and Americans, and I would meet 50 Americans in a week, get to know them. And then a week later, they would leave. And then, like 2 hours later, the next group would show up. And I would get to
yeah,
know 50 new
yeah.
Americans. Meanwhile, I'm getting to know Jamaicans from all over the community and develop,
Mm,
relationships with them over the years. But that is a woo. Woo gets energy off meeting new people. And that's really great. So communication, that's my number two strength. That's what we've talked through before, where
mm,
I really love a good metaphor. I love a good punchline. I love wording things a certain way, and telling a story. Communication people are usually pretty good at communicating their thoughts on something the first time around. They can just kind of spell it out the first try, which is definitely a gift because other people are like, man, I
yeah.
really struggle with the words for my thoughts.
Yeah.
Includer, I love to include people. I really struggle when somebody's left out. And so when I see somebody who's on the fringe of something, I want to include them. Um, and I can also get frustrated with very closed off, selected small groups where they don't
Mm,
include others. That can rub me the wrong way. And I try and create places where everyone's accepted in some form or fashion. So I try and tear down those walls between people. And so when somebody's excluded, I'm like, hey, let's meet you, like have you meet with other people. Hey, have you met this person? Hey, have you tried yes? Hey, do you want to go to this event with us? Like trying to get them ingrained. Strategic is one I use a lot now. And so the strategic strength is really interesting. It talks about how basically you can see patterns where others don't. And so I will look at a lot of data and be able to see a pattern and say, oh, did you notice that there's a curve here? Or that did you notice that the main reason the difference between this or that is caused by blank? And so I do that a lot at work where I'm trying to analyze it and say, hey, did you notice, for instance, all the maintenance guys complain that their backs hurt because they have to bend down to clock out. If we just raise that up a foot, there'd be a lot less back issues. And
yeah,
so I
yeah.
look at this and say, how do we make a more efficient way? And strategic people, they like to sit and stew on things until they
Mm,
find the perfect solution. So shower is like, have you ever watched like Sherlock Holmes with
yeah,
the Benedict Cumberbatch version,
yeah,
where he
yeah.
goes like this and he goes to his mind palace. My mind palace is the shower, so I will take
Mm,
like a 45-minute shower and just be thinking about solutions to my issues, but I won't pull the trigger on a solution until I have thought through 1,000 solutions and eliminated it to the best solution. This will be the
mm,
best. Now I will proceed. I will not try and do it right away. I'll wait. And then
yeah.
the last is context. Context people, you can ask my wife this. She'll be the first to tell you. Context people, when we try and tell stories, we usually provide too much context. So if somebody says in a job interview, why are you applying? I might start, well, I was born in Philadelphia, and I'll start this way before
Yeah.
you should. Like too many
Yeah.
details, too much. But context people, we want to understand why and what brought us to this point. Okay.
Mm,
Regardless of whatever the situation, whether that's, why am I in this job? Why am I frustrated with my situation? Let me backtrack and think, what brought me to here? What's causing my frustration with the situation? We'll think through situations like that. Or we'll be like, okay, why are they doing so well? What's causing their success? And try and like backpedal to like what are the steps that got them there? And we try and diagnose and break apart something and to figure out what the process was for that. And often, the answers to the future are found in the past. That's how we see the world. So we want to know, like, okay, my future was dictated by my past. So what have I done in my past that led me here, and how do I keep going that direction? So,
yeah.
yeah. So those are those strengths, and then those strengths can combine. So maybe you have like a woo and a communication, and that makes me want to tell stories and communicate well.
Mm,
So things like that, that's kind of how my strengths play out with one another.
yeah. Well, that's cool, Debo. Yeah. First off, thanks for sharing with us. We've got
Yeah.
less than a minute left. Um, so hopefully this was like a good way of kind of like just getting to know you, just because I know limitations in interviews are kind of tough, and we can kind of lean into who you are as an individual. So thank you, Debo. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for
Yeah.
opening up. And
Yeah. Thanks for doing
yeah,
this.
if you liked this podcast, give us a like and subscribe and all that fun jazz down there. So we will see you guys later.